I want to talk about some of the stuff that's been going on with the Canon R5. I know it's constant with this camera, it's overheating, the R6, is it good, is it bad? Regardless of all of that, it's pretty interesting what's going on with the Canon R5, specifically because Canon Rumors posted this teardown of the R5. Apparently an engineer kind of pulled the camera apart to dive through the internal components on the R5. And don't worry, we're going to talk about the S1H and a photo comparison I did to the GH5, but that's coming later. I want to talk about this specifically because this is, I don't know, pretty mind-blowing if all of this turns out to be true. You can also check out EOSHD.com. This is Andrew Reed's blog. He's been posting camera, video, photography articles for a long time. I've been following his blog for quite a while. And if you don't know of EOSHD, I definitely recommend you check it out. But he has a nice write-up that I thought we'd read through first, just to kind of go through some of these details around the R5 and what exactly is going on internally that may be causing the overheating. So it's written that there's a Chinese user engineer who disassembled the R5 with kind of the goal of looking at the overheating. And it turns out that there's a lot of stuff going on internally in the R5 that don't make sense from an engineering perspective. Almost as if it's designed to overheat or just completely incompetent design and production, because there's missing thermal components where there should be in order to keep the CPU cool. That's not what's incredibly interesting and crazy to consider. It's later on the engineer fixes a lot of those thermal problems, applying thermal paste, trying to do some heat dissipation to keep the camera cool internally, because we know that's the issue with the R5 is that it heats up from the inside. It doesn't really matter what the ambient temperature is, it's warming itself up. So even after applying those fixes, it gets to the point where the camera is still shutting down after about 20 minutes. So you can see here, however, even with improved conductivity between the heat source and the back casing, the camera still shuts down at 20 minutes, as if this is a fixed timer and firmware. Some people have alluded to that this might be some limitation in the firmware. It's more of a timer than an actual thermometer. So rather than looking at the temperature and it being, oh, it's actually cool enough to operate, the camera's just saying, nope, time's up, you got to wait for the cooldown. Andrew goes on, and if you're unfamiliar with EOS HD, he always has very critical technical opinions of these things, and it may be a little bit outrageous for some people, but I appreciate his opinions and his perspectives on these situations. So he basically takes the stance that if Canon's doing this on purpose, he'll never buy a Canon camera again. It's at the end of his list here where he mentions he would just be done with Canon. But in any case, this leads to an interesting topic of discussion, because if Canon has intentionally designed the R5, the hardware, to intentionally overheat and is poorly designed in that regard, intentionally, that's, I mean, complete negligence on their part. Like, there's no, if they're intentionally hardware crippling, not even just software limitations, but intentionally making the hardware poorly designed for the sake of, thwarting the camera, well, I definitely don't think that should be rewarded with a purchase. And then layered on top of that, if it is a firmware limitation where they're basically just saying, nope, you can't record because we want to protect our cinema line, which is also the running theory currently, that's also extremely disappointing, frustrating, causing severe outrage. I don't know how you characterize such behavior as a business putting out a product that is potentially, most likely, based on the engineering breakdown of pulling the R5 apart, the hardware is not properly designed. That could be due to incompetence, or it could be due to malicious intent and hamstringing the camera. And then if you put on top a firmware situation, which many people are fingers crossed praying that Canon opens up the R5 and the R6 and allows these heat restrictions to be lifted. If it's totally in firmware, then you also have to question the intent. Is all of this by design? Is the camera designed to fail, even though it's a almost $4,000 camera in the R5 or a $2,500 camera in the R6? And this is where I am extremely disappointed, and honestly, I don't really trust Canon all that much in regard to these cameras because we've seen their track record. I did a video talking about the 5D Mark II all the way to the R5 and seeing that progression and basically hamstringing the video features on their hybrid cameras for the sake of protecting their cinema market. Now, I don't have any proof per se that, you know, a written email somewhere that they've documented this, that they're doing it on purpose, but all signs point to this being intentional, that they're not putting their best foot forward because they don't want to cannibalize their own market, which I think is just terrible business practice and should not be rewarded in any capacity. With the R5, it's been a little bit different because they've had the features like 4K 120, the internal stabilization, the autofocus, the 8K RAW, all these great features, and then the excuse has been, well, it just overheats and it's a photography camera, so it can't handle those features. But if the overheating is also by design with timers and bad hardware design and manufacturing, and they're intentionally doing this, you just got to ask yourself, why would you ever support Canon and what they're doing? They either A, don't know how to make a good camera, in which case that shouldn't be rewarded because they're just bad at designing these things. But it seems that some of these, you know, thermal remedies are common knowledge, right? This is normal. If you're doing any kind of electrical engineer work, like, you should know these things. So the fact that and you can read through the article, absolutely. Go to EOSHD, read through all the details, go over to Canon Rumors, you know, check it out. I encourage you, check it out, because at the end of the day, if this could have all been avoided, imagine how great the R5 would be, and the R6 for that matter. You have an 8K RAW camera that maybe overheats at, you know, an hour long or something like that, where you get much more room to play with it, rather than something that's intentionally designed to fail as soon as possible for the sake of limiting those high-end features. It's pretty clear that through the hardware and on the firmware side of things, they could have designed an amazing, brilliant camera, but they chose not to. And then you just have to ask yourself why. And at the end of the day, I don't know that any of us will ever know. I imagine there's going to be a lot of people hacking the R5, trying to pull it apart, get this thermal paste, get this unit, put it back together this way, that'll fix your problem. If we're in a situation in 2020 where we have to hack our cameras apart just to get the features that should have been there by default, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to have to void my warranty just to get the features that I should have had already for buying the camera. Canon should know how to do their job and deliver a solid product, both in hardware and in firmware. So this is just more evidence to the point that this is by design. Signs are pointing that direction. So if you still think you want to buy the R5 or the R6 and they're going to be great cameras for you, totally fine. You don't have to not buy them. You're not a bad person for wanting to buy them. But I personally would not support a company that's not trying their hardest to do the best that they can, which is what I truly believe about Panasonic and the S1H, which is what I'm going to be talking about here very shortly. The S1H, I've rented it. It's been a fantastic camera for the few days I've had it, and I've been using it. And you can tell that a lot of work and effort and love went into making the S1H the best that it could be. And that's what we should all strive for. Companies that are putting the best out, and those are the companies that I personally want to reward with my hard-earned money. And then I get to use a tool that does an amazing, spectacular job for me.